Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I am going to be talking about When They See Us, episode 4. And this, of course, is a show, a mini series that was completely paid for by a patron for review. So this is wrapping the mini series up from Netflix. And goddamn, this final part, this final episode, which is basically a movie, so it's I think almost 90 minutes long, which focuses on Corey, which we expected, given all the teases and the fact that he was completely absent in the previous episode. It might be the show's best episode. It might have saved its strongest for last, and it's it's one of those things where I've seen, again, not really knowing too much about the real person, not really knowing where his real story went. I didn't know what became of him. I didn't know where he went or what he did, whether he was in prison or anything like that. So I wasn't sure what the actual journey was going to be. I wasn't sure if it was going to be this thing where he had to harden essentially and become this tougher guy to get through it. And something that we've seen in a lot of movies where someone innocent goes to prison and they kind of has to toughen up just to survive. So the fact that it wasn't that, and it was actually even more heartbreaking in that he doesn't really do that. I mean, don't get me wrong, he is tougher in a lot of ways. Like, it's not like he isn't tough in a number of ways, but he never really, becomes someone who he's not. He's always still him. He always has the same demeanor. He's always true to his character, and the journey of watching him go through these various prisons, and again, some really expertly crafted moments that are almost very cruel to the audience and how it presents the story. Where it's when he's the transition to obviously it's different from the last episode where we actually had different actors, right? Where we switched to the adult actor, but there is kind of a similar transition in this episode, where you hear the narration or the audio from the previous conversation, the previous scene, where he hears about the prospect of asking for a transfer and how he might end up closer to his mother so she can visit more often. And as we're hearing this again and we're watching him walk into a cell and he turns around and he's a little bit older, he's got a bit of facial hair and he's further away. That's one of the things the episode does constantly, is it puts in the distance from Harlem in the caption. So the idea that he actually gets much further away, and just the cruel conditions of each place he goes to, the cruelty of the guards as well as the other prisoners, and it's there's a lot of heart in there. There's a lot of beautiful moments that are really bittersweet. There's a lot of him imagining and sort of, I don't want to say hallucinating, but just straight up like fantasizing about his life and about what his life could be instead, and about the choices he's made and just little things. And one of the parts that felt so true to me, and I do wonder if this was like input from the real Corey, is when he imagines the night of the park incident, and he remembers the moment from episode 1 where he's sitting in the little the chicken place, and he's with the girl that he's kind of flirting with, and there's that moment where Yusuf like bangs on the window and says, come, we're going to the park, come on. And he has this moment where he looks at her and then he looks at him, and originally, of course, he chose to go with Yusuf, but here he doesn't. Here he's like tempted and he says, no, I'm going to stay here. And it's this really sweet moment, and we cut back to him in the solitary confinement cell, and the lighting's this angelic sort of light hitting him, and he's thinking about it, and the music's kind of this emotional sweet synth that's happening, and it felt so true to me that this way of him just imagining the moment, it fairly what seemed to be an inconsequential choice, if I can speak properly, a moment that didn't feel like it was that big of a deal outside of maybe pissing off this girl that he liked. But something that felt fairly innocent, a choice that didn't actually have anything to do with what happened later in the night. It just so happens to be the choice that led to him being in the place that led to the sequence of events that brought him here. It's not because he made the wrong choice. It's just happenstance. He couldn't have known what making that choice the way he did would have led to. But he's just imagining, what if I had made the other choice? And that moment feels so true to life, and just like, you know, when you're sitting daydreaming or something, whenever you've done something bad or whenever you have made a mistake, you know, if you're at a job and you do something that you get into trouble for, or you know you're about to get into trouble for, and you think about the moment where you made the wrong choice. You think about the moment where if I just went slightly left instead of right, or whatever it may be, you think about how I wouldn't be in this mess. I wouldn't have to feel like this. I wouldn't have to worry like this. This is that multiplied by a million because of the situation he's in, which is way worse than most people ever have to go through. And these moments were just so beautiful, and learning about his family a little bit more than we have done before. His trans sister, who we find out his mother is not like receptive to. In fact, one of the cruelest parts of the whole episode is when he finds out that his sister's dead and has been murdered. And it's this really heartbreaking scene where he breaks down. You know, the guard brings him to the you know, the pastor, the priest, or whoever in the prison, and he informs him of the news. And it's this really sad thing because it's the one person who he always counted on. It's the one person he confided in, and he has no one because his mother can't visit him, and he feels alone. He feels cold. He feels empty, and he just breaks down. And one of the more uplifting elements to the whole story for Corey is when he's at the second prison, which I think is Attica, and again he's being beat up by prisoners, he's being beat up by neo-Nazis, whoever it may be, and you have this guard who's played by Logan Marshall Green, who I did like seeing because I'm a big fan of the actor. He was in a TV show from Cinemax called Quarry that was wonderful. He was also in the movie The Invitation, and I think he was great in those films, on both of those projects. So it was nice to see him, and I was happy that I didn't have to hate his guts, because the previous guard, the first guard at the first prison, is this dirtbag who he's essentially, he corrupts, and he lets like prisoners beat up Corey for some candy bars. Like that's the extent of the corruption here. He wants Corey out of his like allowance or whatever it is he has to buy stuff in prison. He gets him a couple of Crunch bars, and that's Corey paying off the guard for the guard to not let him be attacked, to do his job and keep things peaceful. And you know, it kind of makes you sick. So when you get to the second prison, and you get this guard who reacts a little bit differently, who when he sees what's happened to Corey when he's been beat up, and Corey is willing to fight back a little bit more. He's actually throwing punches, so there is a bit of toughness. I didn't mean to imply that there was no growth or there was no toughening up of who he was, because he has to be incredibly tough in a lot of ways to get through this. But he's still Corey. He doesn't become a completely unrecognizable person through it. But when this guard sees the injuries and he takes him to solitary, and he starts to kind of befriend him, he starts to look out for him, he starts to, you know, ask him about his interests, and Corey talks about, you know, he gets him some magazines, and eventually gets him like a present. He gets him like a, what was it, this super 90s thing, is it a Chia Pet? I don't know. I was like 4, all right? I don't know what's going on here, but he gets him this present. It's this thing where you're kind of waiting for this other, you know, the other shoe to drop here. And one of the big moments in the scene where he finds out that his sister has died is that he essentially kind of starts screaming and yelling that no one's there for him and that no one cares about him. And we don't, you know, you never think for a second that he's actually trying to hurt the priest or he's trying to hurt the guard. And it's the way the guard reacts to this. You know, he sort of like comes up and, you know, tries to like sort of restrain him and grab him, but he doesn't hit him, he doesn't punch him or anything like that. What he actually does instead, and it's actually kind of one of the most touching moments in the whole episode, is this guard, when the previous guard that we saw was a complete dick, and then the guards we see after this at other prisons are awful, this guard hugs him. It's a very strong hug. It's a sort of hug in a sort of restraining way. But he doesn't get angry that Corey is essentially beating his back, you know, while he's being restrained. He doesn't get angry. He's receptive and understands what he's going through, that he's just had this awful news, and he treats him I mean, let's call it what it is. He treats them like a human being. In fact, he even says that later. Like, if something happened to one of my kids where they were accused of something like this, I'd like to know someone was treating them like a human, which is something that fundamentally no one else is treating him like. Everyone is presumed his guilt, and no one believes him. The parole hearings he goes to, they're like, well, you have to admit what you did. You have to like confess to the crimes that you were found guilty. I mean, I think the phrase that the parole board uses, you were proven guilty of, which is not what happened in any way, shape, or form. Nothing was proven. But like I say, this moment where the guard hugs him was such a heartwarming kind of beat, that there is this ally, there is this like ally that he has in there, that someone is kind of looking out for him. And that's why it's so heartbreaking when, after he speaks to his mother, he says, I'm going to ask for a transfer. And the guard's really honest, like, first of all, why would you want to transfer? Like I'm looking out for you. I'm keeping an eye on you, and and just because you ask for a transfer, you may not get closer to the city. You might not get closer to your mother so she can visit. You might be further away. There's no guarantee of where you're going to go. You don't get to pick where you're going if you ask for a transfer. But he does it anyway, and he ends up with a guard who lets him get beat up. He ends up, in solitary again. We have a lot of these scenes playing out, and the whole thing with the sister that's really good, because the flashbacks to this are also really strong, where the mother is yelling and saying very sort of transphobic things to her, and Corey is very receptive and very upset by like everything breaking down, and he's trying his best to kind of be there. But one of the things that his mother says is that she will never refer to his sister by her chosen name. I can't remember what the names were. I think Marcy was the chosen name. I can't remember what the original name that the name at birth, right? Was it Scott? I don't know. I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. The point is, the mother says, I will never call it. You'll never hear that name come from these lips," and she's very adamant about it. And there's a wonderful little moment late on in the story where she comes to visit Corey, and she calls her daughter Marcy. When the subject of the death is brought up, she uses the name, and it's a little thing that it doesn't pay too much attention to. It doesn't like do like a musical sting to let you know, oh, she said the thing. She's she learned something. She grew as a person. That never happened. You never had these it never overplayed it. It was just there, and it was one of those things where if you noticed it, it was a really good little moment in the writing. And speaking of good moments in the writing, the other hallucinations where, or I say hallucinations, the dreams, the fantasies where, almost to survive in solitary, he starts to imagine, other things, and he imagines the girl from that night who he was on a date with, kind of, like showing up, and they go through the door and they go to Coney Island, and they have a day to themselves with no one else in the world, where they're on all the rides, and it's this a sweet day, and it's all this beautiful story, and there's some signposts along the way to sort of, the 9/11 happens on TV, which is notably like a good decade later. And all of this is just, it's so focused in a way that it's almost unfair to the other three episodes in comparison, because the other three are great episodes, right? There's elements in those episodes that are so expertly woven, and the way it bounces around things. But there's part of me will always kind of gravitate towards the stuff that's more focused, the story that's more a real, microscope on a character and the journey and the arc. And so much of this, and him surviving and never losing who he is kind of uplifting, but goddamn infuriating and goddamn heartbreaking along the way. He is someone who feels abandoned, and he just lost and hopeless, that any sign of positivity, any sign of hope that comes out of it is just this thing. And we know that the other four guys all get out earlier. Of course, one went back in, but and it builds up to this thing where he has this fight with this guy, who turns out to later be the actual rapist, the actual culprit from the night in the park. And that's what the episode does. Of course, open up the last like 20 minutes or so. It opens up to away from Corey into more just how the story ends and how everything is resolved with this man confessing and very specifically like confessing to every detail. And the idea that the police, years prior, this guy confessed to several other similar crimes. And if they'd just asked him if he'd done that one, he probably would have just admitted to that too, because why would he lie about that one? But he was never asked, and this is something he volunteered to do because he's found God and because he's trying to make some kind of amends. And as this is happening, again, there's some catharsis for the audience. There's a couple of key scenes that I think are very important. There's a couple of characters who back in episode 1 were so infuriating. I'm thinking of William Sadler's character, the police officer, who Famke Jensen, who's the one kind of like reopening the investigation, goes and like interviews him, and he tries to justify everything he did. She has a meeting with Felicity Hoffman's character, who again stands by everything she did. She, to an infuriating degree of, I'm not losing sleep over this. Those thugs, there was a sixth one, but that doesn't matter. Like, that was the mistake there. Not that these people were innocent. And of course, ultimately, we have the happy ending of the five of them, together in front of a crowd. We hear they're exonerated, and we don't actually see the other four characters, the other four, guys, until the news of this is happening. The first thing we hear, in terms of them finding out, is Corey. He gets the phone call from his mother, and that's a good moment. But we sort of like cut around the others, sort of finding out, and kind of the justice of finally people not thinking they are this thing, of not thinking that they did this awful thing. And obviously, like any true story, work of film or TV, we get the screens at the end telling us about what all the real people went on to do. And I really appreciated them showing the five real men at the end. And it's funny because there's a couple of them look really similar to the actors, but then the other like three don't at all, which is fine. That's not important. But I thought Kevin, adult Kevin, did look a lot like adult Kevin. I thought, especially. But it was nice to hear that they for them, it sounds like they have relatively good lives and happier endings post all of this, and having the big settlement from New York State for the wrongful convictions and all that. But how much trauma did this go through? How much of a witch hunt? How much of villainization? Is that even a word? Villainization? Vilifying? How much of the vilifying of them throughout these years and the treatment they received? Like how much does that psychologically affect someone? And if anything, the most uplifting thing about the story is that they do seem to have been able to move on, and like having them all hold their hands in the air side by side at the end of the story is very affecting. It's super touching stuff. I almost feel bad that I feel like I'm going through this one a little bit quicker, but I think partly that's because it is so focused. There's not 4 or 5 stories going on or 4 or 5 characters to deal with that I'm talking about all the different facets. It's just the one character. But I actually think that's what makes this the best episode. It's the partly because of the focus, and because we just hone in on this one character. We hone in on Corey and him going through this system, and the ups and the downs, and the your heart sinking as you realize just how alone he is when he's at, say, the third prison, and the guard not only lets the prisoners assault him, but actively kind of assists in it, actively like tries to like because his hands are on the bars, he's yelling for help, and the guard just basically tries to pull his hands away so he's not grabbing the bars anymore, and to the point where he's about to hit them, and Corey gets pulled away. And like there's a scene where I think it's the first time he gets beat up in the first prison, where he's in the infirmary and he's asking the nurse, like, how can they just do this? This is not right. They can't just do this whenever they want. And the nurse basically can't help him and says, this is what it is. Like, and she's whispering because she doesn't want the guard to hear her. This is just how it works. This is how corrupt this the prison system is. And it's actually from that first guard that he learns. It's after he gives him the chocolate, where the guard makes it very clear that if he does get beat up, because he can't stop it every time. He'll try his best, but he won't always be able to. If he goes to the infirmary is seen for snitches. Solitary is where you go to make sure no one thinks that you've I was going to use this really Scottish term there, grassed on someone, snitched on them. In Scotland, you say grassed on someone. That's a term. But and that's something that comes up later when he has to go to solitary in the second prison. It's I really can't go over those beautiful moments though. It's when he's having the memories and he's having some sad memories, but it's when he's having those moments where he's thinking about making the other choice and going on the date, and just when it cuts back to him and he looks so different because it's the same actor, but he's got the beard, his hair's grown out, and he's just standing there, kind of almost in euphoria, and you can hear him like saying the words. He's saying the words out loud, and as someone who is very daydreamy, I guess, as a person, like people have often commented that sometimes when I'm like on my own or I'm standing waiting on something, sometimes people will notice that I move my lips, and it's because without even realizing I do it, sometimes like whatever I'm thinking, if I'm thinking about a conversation, like a hypothetical conversation, I'll actually be kind of mouthing it as I'm doing it, and people think I look like a psychopath sometimes when I do that, but it's those kind of things where this experience is so extreme that I can't even fathom how it feels. I can't fathom this experience, but the goal of a piece of entertainment or a piece of art or a piece of media like this, I mean, all art is, and all art is about empathy. All art is about conveying the feelings that someone goes through in a certain situation that the person watching or reading or experiencing the art wouldn't necessarily experience themselves, or if they have, then they can empathize and relate in maybe a more personal base. And that's where sometimes people like they're almost too affected by a story because it is something that's just too personal to something they've actually went through. But the good thing about art is that you can give experiences of someone else, someone different. And in the case of this show in particular, watching this someone who is white, who is not American, who is not none of these things, and has never went through anything remotely like this, is trying to get that experience the best I can, or understand it the best I can, so that I have an opinion on these things going forward. History. No, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Right? That's like the old age sort of thing, and that's kind of the importance of a show like this. The whole point is to show the horror of it, show the humanity inside that horror, and try and learn something and not let it happen again. And it's moments like this where this simple little moment where I related to a simple little thing, not that I really needed to, I was already on board, I was already emotionally invested, I was already there. I like to think of myself as a person with empathy, and I'm already there because characters are presented to me and they're developed, and I see them go through this and react in natural ways, and it hits you. But you have this little moment where he did something. Again, he only does it because of the situation he's in. But he did something that I kind of do, and again, not an extreme way that he's in here, but it's just this little thing that I actually kind of oddly relate to, and him doing that in this absurdly like disastrous like scenario that he's in. Like, just there's this like dose of humanity that just like it's already there, but it personally added this extra element to it that, and I think it's full of those little moments that I'm sure other people will find other things with. Whether it's when he gets a little bit nervous and he stammers a little bit, and he's trying to like explain that he means no harm, and no one's listening to him. If you've ever felt that you've tried to explain what your intentions were something were, and you're scared of the other person, you're scared of the bigger person or the authorities or whoever it may be, and you're trying to explain, and that's something with Corey especially throughout the show, is that he always comes across as someone who is terrified when he's trying to explain what he didn't do and what he isn't. And I think that's where when you do see the strength form, it's the strength of him sitting in front of that parole board and not buckling and saying, yeah, I did this, please let me out. He's like, no, I'm not going to. To the point where eventually he doesn't even go to the parole hearing. He says no point. I'm not. I'm never going to say that I did this because I didn't. And I think that humanity in the middle of all this, and the retention of it, and where we see them come out in the other end is the uplifting ending, which I think we all desperately needed by the end of this, because it is such a journey. It's such a traumatic experience going through. I mean, not to watch necessarily, but it's such a traumatic story that it's an assault on your empathy. It's an assault on your senses, and it's an assault on your not your mood, but like like you know what I'm trying to say. That I think if this had a really really sad ending, if something really bad happened in real life at the end of all this, like this would be an absolutely disturbing result at the end. It'd be such a depressing ending, but seeing them come through this and this story of sort of the human determination and the spirit of the humanity of the characters, like it really is uplifting, and in spite of everything, in spite of the world around them, in spite of all the treatment of the police and the press and everything, they came through as they did better than some other people might have in the same situation, is the uplifting part. So obviously there's a lot of messages to take from this show. There's a lot of lessons to learn from the story, both the show and more importantly the real life story. But yeah, I think if you want to feel better about the world a little bit by the end, that's the part you take from it. You take the coming out on the other end, with their hands held high. So yes, I think the last 5 minutes were honestly a lot of rambling, trying to get across a point that I'm not sure I quite did. But yes, heart-wrenching, gutting, beautiful at times, infuriating a lot of the time, especially. I mean, all four had infuriating moments where you're mad at characters, you're mad at the world, you're mad at all the real things that happened. But there you go. That is When They See Us, part 4. Hopefully you've enjoyed my thoughts and reactions to this. It was a wonderful miniseries. I'm glad that someone went on Patreon and sort of got me to watch this, because the quality here is very high, and it is a very important story. And honestly, the fact that it has like proper like titles at the end where we get all the names and all the rest of it, and that wasn't in the other episodes, it really makes this feel like it was just kind of a big 5-hour movie, because that's actually the runtime. It's just under 5 hours, I think, all combined across the 4 parts, and it genuinely does feel like a 5-hour epic journey where every part was important. And I think the choice to separate Corey and spend the longest episode almost entirely devoted to him was very important, because it's perhaps the one where they saw the most potential of the drama, because he was sent to the worst places, because he had the worst experiences of the group, at least on paper, and certainly how it was presented here. So no. So thank you very much for joining me. I do always appreciate it. You can, much like Zammer Jammer, if I don't remember the name, or is it Jammer Zammer? I think it's Zammer Jammer. The patron who made me watch this, you can go and support us all over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month, and keep all the content coming. And go and have a look. You also hit the like button. Liking is super important, and it gets us out there on YouTube. YouTube will recommend us out a little bit more. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys, and I will see you next time.